If you're a regular listener to Chatter That Matters, you know I love watching or reading documentaries about artists. People that have this extraordinary talent but find a way to monetize it, sing for their supper, chase their dreams, and when they do, they change the world while moving the world around them. But I've come to learn, talking to people like Bob Ezrin, one of the world's most legendary producers, or Harry Connick Jr., that it takes more than sheer talent. You have to build a team. You have to be supported by people that have vision. People that believe in you and there to shape your destiny. One of the key roles is managers. Think of Scooter Braun. He discovered Justin Bieber on YouTube, played a pivotal role in turning him into a global superstar. Sharon Osbourne, we might have known her from the reality show, but behind the scenes, one of the world's most successful female managers, credited for revitalizing the career of Ozzy Osbourne after Black Sabbath. And it was her vision that led to Ozfest, an annual rock and metal music festival. Many people call George Martin the fifth Beatle for the work he did in the studio, but you can't forget about Brian Epstein, his positioning, his influence, his ideas. He discovered the Beatles in Liverpool, played a role in shaping their image, first recording contract, and guiding him to superstardom. And despite his untimely death in '67, his impact on the music industry and the legacy of the Beatles remain unparalleled. Well, my guest today is another one of those managers that see beyond the norm.
We want people to buy the records before they heard them. That's what you want. You want to build the constituencies that is basically trusting you to deliver the goods, and they will judge you differently because they already like you. When I was growing up listening to music, there were certain bands like, Genesis and Yes. When they would put a new record, I would just go get it. I didn't have to hear it first. I would go get it, and then I would put it on and I'd make my own judgment.
His name's Jake Gold. Well known for his work managing the Tragically Hip, one of the world's most iconic rock bands. His guidance was instrumental in shaping them from somebody that sounded really good in concerts to eventually take him into the recording studio. Beyond the Tragically Hip, Gold's managed other artists, contributed to the broader music scene. Keen eye for talent, his ability to help artists navigate the complexities of the music industry. His style, when you talk to people, they say, we love about Jake, he's hands-on, he's artist-centric. He focuses on long-term career developments versus trying to that one-hit wonder.
This is Chatter That Matters with Tony Chapman, presented by RBC.
And for a lot of people that might not know the people in the industry, you certainly know him from Canadian Idol, where he was a judge on that hit show for many years.
I know it's a great song. I've never been a fan of it, but the way you did it, you made me a fan of that song. Fantastic.
Quite a song sheet. And Jake, I'm so happy you found the time to join me on Chatter That Matters.
Nice to see you again, Tony. It's been a while.
I can't wait to get into everything you're doing because your energy and the body of work that continues to come from your desk. But I want to wind it back because I often start with sort of the sense of where did you come from? I guess you were born in New Jersey, raised in Toronto.
Yeah, so my mom was from Manhattan and my parents met in Florida. And my dad ended up following my mom back to Manhattan. They got married there, and a year later, I was born in New Jersey, which is where they settled, not far from where Bruce Springsteen's from Asbury Park, a place called Lakewood, New Jersey. And within 6 months, we ended up moving to Manhattan. And a year after I was born, my brother was born. And then a year after that, we moved to Canada. And I think because my father's support systems and, he had his parents here and everything else. So we moved to Canada when I was 2. So basically, I was raised here, but I am a dual citizen.
So you used the word move, and what I understand from your childhood, it was far from a skip in the park. Lots of moves, financial insecurity. I'm always curious, how does that impact you as a child, and what did you carry with you going forward?
I have to talk to my therapist about that. No, at the time, you're just moving around. You don't even realize how it's impacting you. And you don't realize till years later that you have, all this shit that you deal with because of it. My father died when I was 17. I was kind of left on my own at that point. My mother was around, my younger brother, my younger sister. I probably didn't do great in school after that, just because I was, messing around a lot, smoking weed and, being into music and sports and stuff, but I would always do really well in school, but I could have always done way better if I'd actually shown up. You know, I was that guy. I was just bored. I did have one teacher, I remember in my grade 13 accounting, who I managed to get a passing grade, and he wouldn't pass me. And he said, "You should be getting 90s. So I'm not passing you. You got to come back in the next semester." We were on a semester system. And I said, okay. He said, "You got to come back and really take this seriously, because you're way better than this." And, it was the year my father died. And, it was a lot of turmoil, to say the least. My mother wasn't a working person. So my father was, and he was a gambler, loved the horse races. So, my life was, if he made money that day, we'd be going out for dinner. If we didn't, hide the stereo because it could be hawked, that was my life. But at the time, you're just living it. And I took the accounting class again, and I ended up getting in the 90s. And I always remember this teacher was like, if you actually pay attention and put yourself into it, you're going to win. And that was a lesson then. And his teacher was Mr. Goldberg, and he was the only one that sort of gave a where he saw, like, this guy's got something going on and he needs just a push.
I can't believe how much our lives are like the similar song sheet. I mean, my teacher was Mr. McPherson, who said to me, like, half the teachers want you thrown out of the school. The other half think there's something there. Why don't you join the debate team? And I went, the debate team? And he said, "Do you believe in God?" I said, "No." I said, "So next week you're going to debate why God exists." And that was the beginning, I guess, is, just having somebody reach out and say there's something inside you is so important. But I also we don't underestimate the fact that in grade 6, if my research is right, you managed a talent contest. So, I mean, management came early.
I didn't manage the talent contest. What it was, and it's a funny story because I was reminded of it by some guys that I grew up with, because one of them said, "You always wanted to be a manager." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Don't you remember in grade 6?" So there were these 3 girls, and they wanted to enter the school talent contest in grade 6. And I said, "Okay, I will rehearse you for 2 weeks, and then we'll enter the talent contest." And I rehearsed them for 2 weeks, and they won the contest. So my friends remembered that was my first crack at being a manager.
So I want to move it up to 1985. You met Allan Gregg. I knew Allan back then as a public pollster with Decima, really brilliant guy that really had his hand on the rudder of how people think, felt, and voted. What was his connection to music and to you?
So I was at an event put on by a magazine called Music Express, which Allan was an investor in. And I had already been a manager for about 5 years. This was December 1985. And Allan had been investing also in this singer that he grew up with. And he needed someone to help him, put on a showcase, put a band together that he could play for some A&R people. And it seemed like everyone he had talked to, because they saw him as a guy with money, and that everyone had their hand out. And he was introduced to me by a guy named Earl Seymour, who I knew he was a sax player that I knew through the business. And Earl said, "Look, Jake's super trustworthy. He's not going to take advantage of you." So him and I had a meeting. It's interesting because it's in the Tragically Hip documentary, where I tell the story where him and I have this meeting at his house after this party where we met. His wife comes in and says his nibs is on the phone. He gets up and leaves and comes back and he goes, "Sorry, it was the Prime Minister." And I'm like, who the is this guy? Like, he asked me if I would help him with this thing. And I said, sure. And he goes, "Well, what do you want to get paid for it?" I said, "Look, if we get a deal for the guy, I'm the manager. That's what we'll do." I was the first guy that never asked him for money. I was working with another guy at the time, and things weren't going well. There was drug issues and stuff like that. And I decided I was going to go out on my own. And I called Allan in mid-January of 86, literally 3 weeks later. And I said, "I'm going to work on my own. I'll be working out of my house." And I lived right at Eglinton and Bathurst. Allan's office was at Yonge and Eglinton, and he lived around there too. And he says, "Well, why don't you come see me?" So I went over to his office and we sat down and we put together a business plan and a cash flow projection. He goes, "Look, I'll put up the money, you run the company, and we'll be partners." And January 31st, 86, we started the business. And I saw him as someone I could learn from.
He also saw you in a certain way. In an article in Investment Executive, he's talking about people like you. He said, "There's a pattern in the course of my career. It is basically when I learned to recognize what my strengths are and seize opportunities that allow me to exhibit those strengths. But at the same time, learn to understand your weaknesses and get partners. One of the partners he was talking about was you, the fact that he found somebody that he could trust. Like a lot of people always want to be partners because that's my best friend or we play sports together. But what is the secret sauce of bringing two very different people, one who's starting out and one who's taking a phone call from the prime minister and making it work?
Well, it's interesting you say that, but because at the core of it, we were really similar people. Allan was like just a regular guy, grew up. His dad was a shoe salesman in Edmonton, like he had a love for music. And I was a same kind of guy from North Toronto. We had a lot in common. We saw the world the same way. We understood that truth was important. We understood that, be diligent. We understood that if you want to stand out, you got to be different. I learned a lot about marketing and positioning and that kind of thing from him. Because if you remember, Decima, while it was known for its political work, 90% of its business was corporate work, was brands and companies and General Foods and that. But I think they got a lot of that business because they had the political influence. I think at the end of the day, what brought us together is we both came from kind of meager places and saw ourselves as, this is an opportunity to grow bigger, and weren't afraid of hard work and weren't afraid of getting out there and doing things. I still talk to Allan once a week.
And another interesting thing that I was fascinated about, for a guy that grew up with a lot of uncertainty, dad was a gambler, dad dies early, mom has to, you have to find a way to make it work. You didn't choose the most secure career. I mean, managing is not what I would say, accounting or being a lawyer. I mean, it's pretty volatile. There's good days and bad days and good years and bad years. What inspired you to sort of chase that path, knowing that you had a lot of baggage to still unpack with your therapist about your previous past?
And that didn't start happening till like way later in life. I took a year off and was involved in a carpet cleaning business, and I injured my knee and I couldn't work. And so they ended up buying me out. And I was like, maybe I'll go back to school. And I went to Centennial College for business administration, figuring, well, I got a good math head, a good business head. I was really bored. And I remember I knew this wasn't for me. When I came into the marketing class, there was a note on the board from the teacher that said, Jake, I'm going to be late. Can you please go over this stuff with the class? And I was like, okay, I'm going to go on the road with a rock band, because a friend of mine was in a band and I went on the road as their lighting guy. It was me and a sound guy, and they let me get up and sing because I used to sing in bands in high school. So I got up and sing with them for encores, and I was making $50 a week in 1979, and I just went on the road and I loved it. And I ended up moving to LA for a couple of years, worked in various different jobs there, worked in a phone bank selling office supplies, where I really learned how to cold call people, literally just getting on the phone and selling people stuff that you've never met or talked to before. And I did really well. Like in 1980, I was making like $50,000 a year. In 1980, I was, 22 living in LA. It was kind of fun. But I ended up coming back in 81. And a buddy of mine was in a band, and they asked me if I would be their manager. And I said, I don't know anything about it. And he was a high school friend that was the drummer in the band. Actually, he was a public school friend. And he said, don't worry, you'll be good. I know it. And that's when I started. And I just learned to do it. I just hustled and met people and connected and hung out at agencies looking for gigs. And, I had a part-time job working at a stereo store. And I remember this date so specifically. November 29th was a Friday. I came into work, 1981. The owner calls me. He says, where were you yesterday? They owned a chain of stores called Hi-Fi Express. And he said, where were you yesterday? I said, I was sick. He goes, no, you weren't. I said, well, my band had a last-minute gig, and I had to go to London, Ontario. And he goes, you're fired. I said, okay. And I walked out, and that was the last day I ever worked for anybody again in my life.
No dress rehearsal, this is our life. That's what you got to do. You got to make the most of it.
From Kingston, Ontario, Canada, my friends, the Tragically Hip.
Blue on the street.
If any of us were in another band, I don't think we'd be able to do it because we wouldn't be in another band with our friends.
Crowds would get so loud that you couldn't hear anything happening on stage.
They put on a monster show.
They were loud and tight and forceful, and Gord was mesmerizing.
They made it cool to be Canadian. I feel silly being sort of emotional about it.
The songs that we wrote matter a lot to people. It came at its cost.
I want you to now take me to Larry's Hideaway the evening you first saw Tragically Hip, and obviously Gord, Downie, their lead singer. I know you've been asked this a million times, but just share with the audience what it must have been like to see such raw talent in front of you.
You know, I had been a manager for 5 years. Allan had been sent a tape by another politics friend named Hugh Siegel, whose brother-in-law was friends with the guys in the Hip. We listened to it and thought, oh, this is interesting. Let's set up a gig. So we set up a gig at Larry's Hideaway. I knew Fred, who was the booker there. And I said, I need a place to see this band. And they put them on a Saturday night at like 8 o'clock or something. You know, said hello to the band beforehand, had no idea what we were about to see. And they walked on stage. And within 30 seconds, I looked at Allan. I said, we got to sign these guys tonight. It was explosive.
How do you know that? Like, is it the mood you're walking in on? I mean, what are all the circumstances, or do you just so zero in on the talent and go, it doesn't matter if they were playing at Larry's Hideaway or, you know, on a subway stop, they were the ones?
Well, it's funny because, you know, when I was on the TV show, when I was on Canadian Idol, people used to ask me the same thing. How do you know? How do you know when you see greatness? And for me, it was always an involuntary response. You know, did it make you feel something that you didn't before you saw them? Did it create that involuntary response in you? And that's what happened. Like, you know, every hair on my neck and everything stood up. I was like, holy what did I just see here? And then you realize, oh, this is the bar. This is what greatness is. This is how good it has to be. And it wasn't just Gord, it was all of them. It was so powerful and so dynamic. And the audience was there to see the next act. And back then, you sat. Larry's Hideaway was cabaret. Everybody sat. Remember, almost all the bars weren't standing bars. They were sit-down bars. And they were there to see a Rolling Stones clone band. That's who the headliner was. And at the end of the 40 minutes, the whole place stood up and cheered. They had just seen a band play 2 covers and the rest all original music that they'd never seen before. So even though I felt it off the top, that whole audience felt it too. And you kind of chase that for the rest of your life. You know, you're looking for that again and again and again and again. Am I going to feel that again? Am I going to feel that again?
Do you ever try to force your brain to believe that? Or do you just trust your instincts that it might never happen again? Because sometimes that's just a once in a lifetime.
It is once in a lifetime for that kind of greatness, because that's, you know, Gord Downie as a singer was a special thing, and the band, the way they played with him and how he moved off them and everything, that's a special thing, right? I've worked with other acts that are super talented, that have great communication skills, that fans love their music and everything else, that haven't gotten as big as that. And that's because that is a once in a lifetime thing. That is a really special thing. And that doesn't demean the other acts in terms of their talent and their songwriting ability and everything else. But there's a difference between, you know, being really, really good and great and being iconic. And I think the Hip fall into the iconic place.
The best place I've seen it many times was at Canada Day in Trafalgar Square.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people were there that had, you know, they just didn't have the same Canadian connections that I did, and it didn't matter. What I'm curious about is, you know, this is a tight group. They're friends. There's an incredible bond. They have trust. How do you work your way in as a manager so that you are part of the family versus, I don't want to say this wrong, but a necessary evil? I need a manager. I need this interruption. That without him or her, I can't get to where we want to go. How do you break that down so suddenly they look and say, hey, when we sign the canvas at the end of the year, here's the pen. You're part of this.
I think that you have to prove yourself, you know, like, and it's interesting because in the, you know, the deals change very quickly, right? Where at the beginning, the bands need you. You're the experienced one. You've been in the business. You have the contacts. You have the Rolodex. You remember that, Rolodex? You have the ability to make things happen. You can get gigs. You can get them record deals. You do all of that, right? So you become an important thing for them because you're the conduit to the industry. And, you know, I always like to say that the greats, the truly greats, are unemployable. Like they couldn't have a real job. You couldn't see Bob Dylan working anywhere, or John Lennon, or like those kind of people are just they're not employable. Could you see Prince working like at a bank? You know, like that's not going to happen, right? So they need people like us that can be their spokespeople on the business side. But what happens is that the dynamic starts to change because as they become more successful, the dynamic changes. While you can maintain that need, at the same time, there's a balance now because now they start to feel more powerful. They're the ones in charge, and they start to dictate the schedule and dictate how they're going to do things and what things are going to look like and everything else. And if you work with great artists, they see you as an asset to help them deliver their vision. Sometimes you see it in a situation where, you know, they start to have disdain for the manager or for everyone around them because they think that the relationship can be like, I listened to you telling me what to do all these years. Now I'm going to tell you what to do.
And I guess that's just natural evolution, right? As you said, of who's got influence and authority. Because early on, you kind of held them back a bit by saying, before we really chase radio, let's build this community of fans. Let's create the electricity you created at Larry's Hideaway in other areas. Were they receptive to that? Did they sort of say, listen, this guy knows what he's doing? Or
honestly, they really wanted to take things slow. And I think that's why they liked what our plans were, is they weren't chasing fame. They wanted it to be on their terms at the right time. You know, Gord Downie would always say to me, I want success on my own terms. So if it meant not chasing the golden calf, so to speak, they didn't want to do that. They liked what our plans were. They liked the fact that they wanted to take things slow, and that we wanted to take things slow. You know, we purposely put them into smaller venues and did multiple nights because we wanted everybody in the town to get a chance to see them. Because if you came in for one night, you're gone, and the word of mouth would spread, and you wouldn't be there to meet it. We would put them in for 3 nights in places, and by the third night, it was always packed, no matter where they were. Because back then, word of mouth spread. We didn't need the internet to spread word of mouth. It literally happened old school way.
You managed it from 86 to 2003, and we're going to come back because you came back later to preserve their legacy. But before we get to the legacy part, what's on your highlight reel?
There's 2 really big ones for me. We launched another roadside attraction, which was the traveling festival, which had never traveled across Canada. No one had ever done a festival across Canada, and we launched it. Second night at Markham Fairgrounds, they walked on stage, and I was side stage, walked on with them and, you know, stayed on the wings. And they opened with Locked in the Trunk of a Car, and the song kicks in and the whole crowd gets lit up. I just remember that feeling like, holy shit, like we pulled this off. We're now playing to 40,000 people in Toronto. We hadn't even played an arena yet. You know, we had held back about playing arenas until the next record. And then the next one was we did a concert in Winnipeg in 2001 to raise money for War Child. It was something that we had been talking about for a long time with me and the guys, about doing a free concert but still being able to raise money. How could you do a free concert and raise money for a charity?
Yeah.
They wanted to do like a ticketing event and all this other stuff and do it at the Forks. And I said, let's make a lot of noise. Let's fill the Forks with like 70 to 100,000 people. I said, but we'll do it for free. So we thought if we get enough sponsors, it'll look like a race car driver's suit, which had tons of sponsors on it, right? So it wasn't like any one sponsor would own it. And then we passed a bucket around the crowd. We raised $400,000 for them and basically put War Child on the map. And I remember when they walked on stage, I was standing side stage with Denise Donlin because Much Music was going to filming it and going to broadcast it after. And Gord took the mic and he just said, put the money in the bucket. And in 20 minutes, $140,000 went into the buckets that were being passed around. And I looked at Denise and I just heard that crowd, and you couldn't see where the crowd ended. There was 100,000 people there. And I said to her, I go, this is why we do this. for this feeling. We do this for this feeling right now. And Denise looked at me and she goes, you're right. This is exactly why we do it.
So you and I have another similarity. We were both in television shows. I was in Recipe to Riches. You happened to be in the #1 television show, Canadian Idol. And you did it for 6 years.
Right.
And you were fantastic in it. How did that come about? Because that was a very different role for you. I mean, this isn't behind the scenes. I mean, the camera's on and you've got to be the lead singer.
Well, interestingly enough, the Hip and I parted ways in January of 2003. There was a lot of tension. There was mistrust everywhere. And it was amongst them, me, them amongst themselves. It wasn't a good time for anybody. And 2 weeks later, I got a call to do the show. And I turned them down because I thought, it's not really me. That's not my kind of music. I don't really see myself that way. And my now ex-wife said, you should go meet with them. I think you'd be good at this. I'd never even seen the American show. The American show had been on for one season. It became a cultural phenomenon after one season. And so I said, okay, I'll go take a meeting with them. And I took a meeting with them, and They had a studio set up in the basement, cameras, and they had fake singers. They had hired musical theater people to pretend to be Susie from Saskatoon and stuff like that. And they give you notes and you do the thing, right? And when I walked out of there, the guy, one of the camera guys said to me, have you done this before? And I said, no. He goes, oh, you're the best guy we've had here. Because they didn't say anything, right? Because TV, how it works, right? And then they called me back for another audition. There was 6 of us. And then they picked the 4 of us. And by March, we were on the road to Vancouver starting the show. Nobody knew how it was going to go. But the Idol thing had sort of had a life of its own, and we were country 4. So it started in England, then it went to Australia, then it went to the US, and then it came to Canada. But Canada was the only country that saw other countries' Idol, because we saw the American Idol. But the UK never saw the other countries. None of the other countries saw it. So that's why they chose to go with 4 judges, because they didn't want it to look like the American show. So I was lucky enough that I got to be myself, because they had, the mean guy was Zach, and they had, the black guy, which was Farley, who came from the urban world, and they had the girl singer, which was Sass, and me. I kind of got to play myself. I didn't have to sort of play to type, which was good, because I did lay down some rules at the beginning. I told them, because none of it was scripted. But they would say, maybe you shouldn't say that, or, stuff like that. But none of it was scripted. And I said, look, I'm only going to ever say the same thing I would say to a client of mine. So don't expect me to be any meaner, any tougher, any nicer, whatever. I said, I'm just going to tell the truth all the time, because that's who I am. So I remember walking with Allan when before we started the show. And he said, you have an opportunity now to really define yourself. He gave me some good advice. He said, really define who you are, because now you're going to have an audience of 2 million people.
It must have been so different for you because, a handful of people would know you well outside your Rolodex, which is like anybody else in life. And next thing you know, everybody knew you.
Well, it's funny. It was funny seeing your face on billboards and bus shelters and television commercials and getting recognized. And now you're being asked to go to all these fancy parties and red carpets and all this other stuff. And you're getting clothing budgets. And, it wasn't a life I asked for. It wasn't a life I wanted. I learned very quickly that you have to be magnanimous. You have to appreciate the fans. And it's the same kind of stuff that I had talked to my clients about. Now I was telling myself, this is how you have to act around people. Funny story. It was Christmas and we were shopping at the Loblaws up around, I lived in Riverdale, up around Danforth and Broadview there. And I was outside, it was snowy, and I was big parka, hadn't shaved in a few days because I'd been off, and holding the dog. And some woman comes up to me and she goes, are you Jake Gold from Canadian Idol? And I'm like, yeah, that's me. And she goes, you look like
So before we get back into the returning to the hip and the legacy, because there's preserving their legacy, because you're doing such brilliant work, you just got recognized with one of the highest honors. Did you not?
I was inducted into the Canadian Music Industry Hall of Fame in June.
That's incredible. I mean, this is such a testament. And it would almost like often when you go into a Hall of Fame, you feel like your career is over, but it's far from it. But they're going, why are you giving him a Hall of Fame? He seems busier today than any time that I've ever met you.
They asked me if I would accept, and I looked at it as an opportunity to remind everybody I'm still here, as opposed to I'm going away. You know, two of the guys in the Hip did the Induction, which was beautiful. My other group, The Pursuit of Happiness, performed 2 songs. I had my friends and family there, and it was nice to be honored, nice to be recognized. And especially it was done during Canadian Music Week at the Live Music Awards, which were my people, managers, agents. People say, oh, it's just great to be honored, and it's true. It's great to be honored.
When we come back, Jake and I delve into the day he found out that a Canadian icon, a global icon, and even more importantly, his lifelong friend, Gord Downie, had passed away. Hi, this is Tony Chapman. I'm a huge fan of the arts and a champion for all RBC's doing to support the Canadian artist community. Take the Toronto International Film Festival. This is the 17th year RBC's been a sponsor. As a fan, you might have heard of the RBC House, the go-to venue for film industry parties. You might have found your way onto the RBC Red Carpet Gallery, one of the most coveted spots for stargazing. But what many of you might not know is what RBC is doing behind the scenes to help emerging women film directors stage intimate cocktail fundraisers celebrating the world premieres of Elton John's Never Too Late and Andrew Bocelli's Because I Believe, the TIFF Black Excellence Brunch in partnership with Brand USA, and so much more. Culture, community, and festivals? Well, that matters to you, to me, and to RBC.
Years, relationships can get strained.
We probably should have had some therapy. I think at that point we probably needed it.
We knew there were problems. There was anger and frustration and resentment. And then Gord got his diagnosis.
First we'd climb the tree.
It was brain cancer and it was incurable. The worst of the worst.
Memories, which used to be my forte. And now I can't remember people's names and can't remember lyrics.
What he's planning to do next is nothing short of awe-inspiring.
We got together and started to rehearse, to write an end to our own story.
No dress rehearsal. This is our life.
People came out and they showed their appreciation, gave Gord their love, and it helped him.
And I swear, as we progressed, he got better, and it was unbelievable.
And by the end of the tour, he felt like old Gord.
Tonight we smoke
Multiple generations of Canadians decided that the Tragically Hip were our band.
They will define for generations to come the music that exemplifies this country.
You're listening to Chatter That Matters with Tony Chapman, presented by RBC.
Today, my special guest is Jake Gold. He's a friend. He's someone I've admired for decades. He focuses on what matters most, and that's music and how it makes us feel. But of equal importance, helping the artists that pursue their craft find a way to monetize it so they can, in fact, sing for their supper. Talk to me about Gord Downie and his passing. That must have impacted you in a most profound way.
Well, it's interesting because that was during the time where I wasn't working with the band, but we were still all friends and that. And I did go to a bunch of the shows off the final tour, including the final one in Kingston. And I had a chance to talk to Gord a few times during that. He was being pretty protected because, you know, after each show there was physio and it was this, he had to do all this stuff just to be able to do the next show, you know. And they never played back to back. It was always a day off between the shows. But I remember I was sitting at home. I got a text from somebody that had heard before I got up in the morning, and I looked at my phone and there was this text. You know, turn on the TV and there's, you know, Trudeau crying about it. And I realized, wow, this is something. And Randy Lennox, who at the time was running Bell Media, but we worked together when he was running Universal. I messaged him. I said, what are you doing? He goes, oh, I'm just sitting at Soho House. I got the back booth. I don't know, kind of bummed out. What are you doing? I said, nothing. He goes, come on over. And we just sat there for 7 hours reminiscing, you know. It was a tough day for sure. Lost a lifelong friend, you know. Even after the band and I split, I continued to work his solo stuff for 2 more records because he really wanted me involved in his life. When I lived in New York for 4 years from 98 to 2002. His mother-in-law rented my house, which was 8 doors down the street from where he lived. And so he was always in my house with his wife and his kids, even though I wasn't there. So we were very close. And it was hard. It was hard just to see what he had to go through. You know, when I'm watching the documentary, I'm seeing stuff that none of us really knew because Mike included home video footage of Gord when he was going through that right up until he died.
Well, talk to me about this documentary because you shared the trailer with me and it just gave me chills, the same kind of chills that you're talking about you and Randy in the back booth. You've really dedicated a lot of time and effort in the last couple of years to making sure that their legacy continues.
So in 2020, the guys who were managing the band, who happened to be, one of them worked with me and one of them was my roommate for 4 years, they decided they didn't want to do it anymore. I had always thought, wow, there's so much more we can do. And I also think the guys were in mourning. You know, they were still pretty fractured. I heard they quit. I sent the guys a letter. I said, you know, we need to talk. And we had a 3-hour Zoom meeting, and 2 days later they went, yeah, let's do this. So I immediately went to work finding old tapes that they couldn't find these tapes for 2 years. I found them in 24 hours. And I got great advice. A good friend of mine is the CEO of Apple Corps, which is the Beatles. So he basically does what I do, but he does it for the Beatles. And I called him up. I said, I'm back. And I said, what advice can you give me? He said, first find out what you got, then you'll know what to do with it. And then we knew Mike wanted to make the doc, so he put together his template, Mike Downie, Gord's brother, who's a documentary filmmaker. And we made the deal with Amazon, and it was all timed. We've been putting out box sets and unreleased music and new singles and everything else, but it was all the doc and the book that's coming out and the box set for Up to Here that's coming out this year. It was all timed around the 40th anniversary of the band. This is the 40th year of the Tragically Hip. They played their first gig in 1984. So we're now rolling everything out. The doc's going to premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 5th. It's going to come out on Prime worldwide sometime in September. The guys are now regretting. They're like, we were retired. I'm like, not anymore.
How much is Gord channeling this through you? Is he there approving it in your mind? Is he helping to shape?
Interestingly enough, you know, Pat Downie, Gord's younger brother, and Mike and Gord's widow, they run the estate. But Mike and Pat are sort of the day-to-day guys on it, and Pat more than anyone. So Pat sits in on all the meetings. So Pat is Gord in the meetings. So he's the one that holds all of Gord's notebooks at his house. So in a lot of ways, there is Gord. Gord is there, you know. And a lot of times we'll say there'll be decisions. They have been decisions where Pat has said, I don't know if Gord would go for that. And the other guys would go, yeah, you're right. Yeah, we can't do that. You know, where we've turned down the chance to put a song in a TV commercial or something like that. And if it's not the right brand or the right kind of thing, yeah, it's been turned down.
So when this is wrapped up, I mean, because there's so many things you're putting out there now. I mean, from a guy that was, you know, I don't know much about managing bands to now doing movie deals and book deals and everything else. When this gets wrapped up, is that your legacy or what do you think's next for you?
I have a young guy in my office that is my right-hand guy, and he's bringing in new acts, and I'm sort of guiding him. Who knows? Maybe we'll break a new young act or something like that. I still have people coming to me to work with them. I don't have an appetite necessarily for starting with someone from the bottom, and my time management is important, as you know. You know, you have to look at the value of your time. But the hip thing, it's going to go. I don't know if it's going to wrap up. You know, we're working on a lot of stuff that I can't really talk about right now, but there's a lot of stuff that's going to go for another 5-10 years for sure, at least. I'm kind of tireless, and I don't know what else I'd do if I wasn't doing this anyways. Like, I'd be bored. I can't play tennis every day. I mean, I'd like to, and I probably could, but I'd still want to work because I don't see it as work.
I'm the same way. I think the thing I fear the most in life is retirement because I have no plans.
Like, I wouldn't know. And it's not even about the money, Tony. It's never been about the money. Like, I've never been, it's important to get the money. You have to pay your bills, those kinds of things. But I've never been motivated by money. I've been motivated by do the right things. The money's going to come, and that's always been sort of how we did things with the guys in the Hip. It's like, so when I meet these young acts and they just want to be famous, I'm kind of turned off by that. Like, tell me you want to make great work. Tell me you want to change the world. Tell me you want to make a difference. Then we got something to talk about. But if you just want to be famous, it's not really for me.
Jake, I've talked to you over the years about coming on this show, and I'm glad we timed it when we did because there's so much happening. And I do believe sometimes in intervention. I think it was meant for this episode to come out as the show premieres. But I always end with my 3 takeaways. And the first one I think that I really admire about you is this sense of crawl, walk, and then sprint, and the sense of that it doesn't have to happen overnight. And the people you've worked with and done your best work are the people that really understand that it's better to spend 4 nights in one town because word of mouth, don't create a vacuum. You got to fill that. And just the fact that you take the time where today everybody wants instant gratification. The second one is this. All the things you packed in your knapsack that you just rolled off, I worked in carpet cleaning, then I learned how to sell on the phone and stuff. And I always say to people, any situation you're in, even if you don't like where you're in, there's always something to take away and put in your knapsack and work on another day. But the most important thing you shared, and I would say it'd be on my highlight reel, is this is why we do it, for that feeling. To open your mind out there to realize there's going to be times when you have this feeling. Cherish it, preserve it. Yes, chase it for the rest of your life, but never, ever forget what it felt like when you find yourself in that moment in life where the compression of creativity and intensity and feelings and emotions are all there and they explode. So for all of that and more, my friend, it's just been a pleasure to have you on Chatter That Matters.
Well, thank you. And it's funny you talk about the crawl, then walk, then sprint, because this year I had double knee replacement surgery, and I literally have gone from crawl to walk to sprint.
If you're a fan of the show, you know that my guest has appeared on several occasions. He's Mark Thomas. He's the Senior Director of Brand Marketing at RBC. He's got his hand on the rudder with everything to do with Toronto International Film Festival. Mark, welcome back to Chatter That Matters.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me.
This has been a partnership that RBC's been involved with for many years. I guess the first question is why, and why does it matter so much to your organization?
RBC this year will be our 17th year as the official bank sponsor of TIFF. We're incredibly proud of that. We genuinely believe that the arts are essential to building vibrant and prosperous communities. I think all of us at RBC are just proud to support such a vital, important cultural event, one that celebrates ideas, diversity, and nurtures emerging Canadian talent from all backgrounds.
I'm curious because a lot of people really don't understand the dynamics of marketing, and your RBC's involved with TIFF, the Olympics, PGA golf. They're bringing Taylor Swift to Canada. How do you prioritize all of that and make sure that the consumer gets a consistent message, that they really understand sort of that song sheet that you're singing from when you're talking RBC?
Beyond our belief that supporting the arts is essential for community, for society, more broadly, what we're trying to do is support the things that our communities care about and that our clients care about. And so, when you list some of the things that we're involved in, TIFF, we marvel at how not only the film community, but the general population comes to life during the festival. It's such a unique mix of filmmakers, both emerging and established, stars, fans, and the entire community coming together to support something important, art and film. There's a passion there. Candidly, we find it energizing to be part of something that generates such passion.
A lot of cities are struggling and a lot of festivals are struggling to stay vibrant, to stay alive in these tough economic times. How important is it as a society that we put our collective consciousness towards having these things that sort of focus on positivity and possibility?
One of the ways that we can make our way through this complex world, one of the ways in which we can bring some positivity to people's lives, is by all of us opening up our hearts to hearing about each other's stories, each other's perspectives, truly listening to how we're all trying to get through this very complex world and the diverse background experiences that we all come from. And I think film is one of the most important and impactful mediums to do so. Even to play a small role in all of that is why we continue to partner with TIFF. And I think why we're so proud of our collective efforts year over year in and around the festival.
A couple of the themes that you've talked about, diversity, talent, emerging filmmakers. What can we expect this year from RBC and TIFF that's going to put a smile on my face and I hope millions of other Canadians?
This year, we're exceptionally excited about some of the things that we've got going on. Many of the tried and true festival favorite activations and events will return. All of it is designed to enhance that festival experience for talent, fans, creatives, and clients. A few of the things that, you can expect to see out there. RBC House will be back for its 6th festival season, and that continues to be the go-to venue for film and industry parties, and will once again host several noteworthy events for emerging and established talent filmmakers. Also returning is the RBC Red Carpet Gallery, which is one of the most coveted spots for celebrity spotting during TIFF, which is, I know, something that the fans genuinely care about. To champion programming that's focused on nurturing diverse and emerging Canadian talent, we're proud to co-present the 2nd annual TIFF Black Excellence Brunch in partnership with Brand USA. It's an event that supports Black creatives while providing meaningful networking opportunities and a panel discussion with industry experts. We're also supporting events throughout the festival that are benefiting the TIFF Every Story Fund through intimate cocktail fundraisers celebrating the world premieres of Elton John, Never Too Late, and Andrea Bocelli, Because I Believe. Both events are going to be incredibly special. I think they're going to be highly talked about, and I think they're going to be something that people care about. And all of that goes towards giving back to the communities at large.
Mark Thomas, always a pleasure to have you on my show, my friend, and just continued congratulations for everything you're doing for the arts, for emerging artists, and putting the smile on the faces of Canadians that so desperately need to smile nowadays. So thank you for joining me in Chatter That Matters.
Thanks, Tony. It truly is our pleasure.
Chatter That Matters has been a presentation of RBC.
It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.